Have you ever let a small, subtle insult slide just to keep the peace? Did you quickly brush off a highly disrespectful comment to be the bigger person? We are falsely taught that ignoring minor disrespect shows massive emotional maturity. We deeply believe that taking the high road will make toxic people respect our patience. But the dark, terrifying psychological reality is completely the opposite. Manipulators use small, calculated insults as highly aggressive boundary tests. If you do not violently crush the very first tiny drop of disrespect, you are actively inviting them to entirely burn down your massive, beautiful castle. Before we uncover the incredibly dangerous psychology of tolerated disrespect, please take a quick moment to hit the like button right now. Subscribe to our channel for more deeply powerful life lessons. In the highly prosperous, heavily fortified center of an ancient, massive empire, there lived a deeply respected, incredibly wealthy estate lord named Valerius. Valerius had spent decades building a breathtaking, utterly invincible stone fortress. He was famously known for his massive generosity and highly patient, calm demeanor. One freezing evening, he hosted a grand, incredibly expensive banquet for the local nobles. Among the invited guests was a highly arrogant, deeply insecure minor lord named Cashin. Among the invited guests was a highly arrogant, deeply insecure minor lord named Cashin possessed absolutely no real wealth, but he heavily craved massive social dominance. During the beautiful, highly extravagant feast, Cashin loudly mocked the quality of the wine. He intentionally delivered the insult with a fake, highly cowardly smile. Valerius heard the deeply disrespectful remark, but he chose to completely ignore it. He falsely believed that reacting to such a pathetic man was entirely beneath his massive dignity. But human psychology is deeply predatory, and Cashin was actively hunting for weakness. Because Valerius did not immediately, aggressively check the minor insult, Cashin's highly toxic, massive ego violently expanded in the silence. The very next week, Cashin returned to the fortress and actively insulted Valerius's loyal guards. Once again, Valerius heavily sighed and chose the deeply comfortable, highly passive high road. He foolishly convinced himself that his massive silence was a beautiful sign of stoic strength. But the rest of the viewing court did not see a highly disciplined, stoic master. They saw a massively powerful lord who was entirely too terrified to defend his own house. By the third week, Cashin arrogantly walked directly into the grand throne room. He highly aggressively kicked his muddy boots onto Valerius's beautiful, heavy oak table. He loudly demanded a massive cut of the estate's incredibly expensive, highly premium harvest. The other nobles watched in absolute, terrifying silence, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Valerius finally realized the massive, completely devastating psychological mistake he had made. His highly noble desire to quietly keep the peace had actively bred a massive, toxic monster. He had willingly handed the incredibly heavy keys of his fortress to a pathetic, muddy rat. From the dark, smoky shadows of the grand hall, an ancient, heavily scarred military general stepped forward. The old general had famously commanded the most violently disciplined army in the known world. He looked at Valerius with an incredibly piercing, heavily disappointed, terrifyingly cold stare. "If you allow a single, tiny spark to comfortably burn on your beautiful, highly expensive rug, you completely lose the absolute right to cry when your entire massive house violently burns to ashes. The old general brutally explained the dark psychology of the broken window theory. A single unpunished disrespect is a highly aggressive, massive psychological green light. It tells every single toxic predator in the room that your massive boundaries are completely fake. Valerius felt a massive, deeply painful shockwave entirely shatter his passive, peaceful ego. He immediately stood up, his massive frame completely blocking the light of the roaring fire. He did not fiercely scream, he did not wildly argue, and he did not violently curse. He simply looked at the deeply arrogant, highly panicked Cashin with absolute, terrifying silence. He slowly drew a heavy, incredibly sharp iron blade and aggressively drove it into the oak table. He coldly ordered his elite, heavily armed guards to violently drag Cashin out into the freezing mud. He permanently banished the highly toxic, deeply pathetic lord from his massive territory forever. The other nobles violently shuddered in the dark, absolutely terrified by this sudden display of power. They instantly, deeply realized that the highly patient lord was incredibly, undeniably dangerous. This is a highly aggressive journey into the dark psychology of absolute, immediate boundaries. It is defined by the absolute human need to fiercely protect your own premium, highly expensive respect. You must fundamentally understand that highly toxic, manipulative people do not attack all at once. They actively deploy tiny, highly calculated micro-insults to aggressively test your defensive walls. If you awkwardly laugh at a deeply disrespectful joke just to keep the social mood comfortable, you are actively, violently betraying your own soul and heavily inviting massive future abuse. Stop desperately trying to be the incredibly nice, highly forgiving, bigger person. Being the bigger person with a deeply toxic narcissist is a highly pathetic form of emotional suicide. The absolute highest form of psychological self-respect is the immediate, terrifying correction. When someone actively crosses a deeply sacred line, you must forcefully snap the boundary back. You do not need to aggressively lose your temper or wildly scream like a desperate victim. Your deep, terrifyingly calm eye contact is infinitely more devastating than a highly emotional outburst. Let them violently complain that you are suddenly incredibly sensitive or highly dramatic. Let them desperately try to gaslight you by claiming it was just a simple, harmless joke. A deeply toxic manipulator uses the word joke to heavily mask a highly calculated psychological attack. When you finally aggressively shut down the very first tiny drop of massive disrespect, you completely paralyze their deeply manipulative, highly arrogant strategy in its tracks. You loudly communicate to the entire universe that your peace is heavily guarded by iron walls. Reclaim your absolute, undeniable power today by completely destroying the illusion of your extreme tolerance. Do not ever desperately compromise your massive worth just to avoid a highly uncomfortable conversation. The momentary discomfort of setting a harsh boundary is infinitely better than a lifetime of massive disrespect. Stay completely cold to their cheap, highly toxic manipulation and fierce social pressure. Let your absolute, terrifyingly firm boundaries be the loudest, most devastating statement you ever make. If you found true value in this dark, psychological lesson today, please hit that like button right now to actively support the channel. Leave a comment below about your own journey with crushing disrespect. Subscribe to the channel for more deeply powerful life lessons.